Hi everyone, this is Nick Pollock here from Roar Lions Roar. While you're here, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that alert bell so you never miss any of our new content. And if you prefer to listen instead of watch, make sure you check us out on your podcast platform of choice where you can subscribe and download each new episode. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. Go State!
Hi everyone, welcome to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. I'm your host Bill DeFilippo, joined tonight by my co-host Matt Filipovitz. Matt, we're going to the ship.
Bill, we're going to the ship. I want to start things off today, though, by floating something out there that's been on my mind. When I take the train into work, and I take the train into downtown Chicago at least 3 days a week, I usually go into my office like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is how I like to do it. And with that comes the New York Times crossword. And Monday's the easiest day, I'm sure, as many people know. And then it gets progressively harder as it goes. So like Monday's money. Tuesday's pretty good. Wednesday, like you can tell I went to public school. And then by like Thursday, it's game over. And I really struggled with it today. And I'm kind of worried it's going to throw me off my podcast game. But I'm inspired by the opportunity Penn State has to win a Big Ten title. So I'm hoping to rally through it.
Why does this have you concerned it will throw you off of your podcast game?
Because talking, letters, I don't know, creating words that make sense. I was a little bit worried today. I'm like, damn, that wasn't as strong as I was hoping for, but I'm hoping I can rally here in the back half of the day.
Well, despite the fact that I've said your name approximately 500 times in my life, I messed it up at the very beginning of this podcast. So we're both really, really firing on all cylinders, which is weird because you would think if there was one thing, Matt, that would get us firing on all cylinders is the fact that Penn State is, as we mentioned at the top, going to the ship. They're going to the Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis, Indiana, to take on the number one seeded Oregon Ducks on Saturday evening at 8 p.m. in Lucas Oil Stadium. Game, as we learned on the last episode of the podcast, is being broadcast on CBS. Oregon again entering this game undefeated. They are 12-0.
The only undefeated team
season.
remaining in FBS, which is crazy.
Yeah, only undefeated team in college football this year, their first year in the Big Ten. They got through their non-conference slate and have just taken care of business in Big Ten play, picking up most notably wins over Ohio State, Illinois, and a road win against Wisconsin are the highlights of their schedule. They actually survived a major scare early in the year against Boise State. Ashton Jeanty, kind of the game that he really announced himself as a guy you're going to have to pay attention to in college football. Took it to Oregon, but Oregon was able to survive that game, able to survive all their other games. And as a result, first year in the Big Ten, they are 12-0, 9-0 in conference play. And Matt, they were the team that was supposed to be here. I believe they might have wrapped up a berth in the game after they beat Wisconsin or Maryland. I can't remember off the top of my head.
It would have been after Wisconsin, I want to say, because if you remember, Oregon had a very late bye. So they played 11 games before everybody else. So the timing is a little bit different than everybody else by nature of them having a bye the second last week of the regular season, which kind of worked out really well for Oregon, like especially to have an off week. Well, Penn State, I think, is going to be going into, is it 7 or 8 straight weeks with a game now? It's a pretty hellish run they're on.
Yeah, something like that. But Oregon was able to wrap up their spot in this game. Penn State, of course, got a little bit of help in Columbus, Ohio last weekend by way of the Michigan Wolverines, which pulled an upset on Ohio State and prevented a rematch of one of the games of the year, which occurred in Eugene on the same day that Penn State went to Los Angeles and beat USC. Oregon was able to take care of business against Ohio State 32-31 earlier this season. And Matt, here's my general thought on all of this. I know that Penn State, as the underdog, as the team that is quote unquote not supposed to be here, is supposed to have the whole playing with house money thing about them. I kind of reject that completely because I don't believe there is such thing as playing with house money and there not being as much pressure on you as there is on the other team when a Big Ten championship is on the line.
I get what you're saying, Bill. I get both sides of this coin. Like, I totally get the idea that Oregon's the number one team in the country. This is a team that, has been impressive all year long. Like, there is a realistic chance Oregon is going to have wins over a top 4 seed in Boise State and 2 teams that host playoff games. Like, they might have 3 wins against top, what is that, 8 seeds, and they're going to be one of them. Like, it's really impressive what Oregon has done this
Yeah.
year. But also at the same time, Bill, I also totally get that if you make the Big Ten title game, there is that pressure of playing for the Big Ten title that naturally comes with that environment. So I get both sides of this coin, like 100%. Oregon should be favored in this game. I've heard a lot of people, kind of say, I was surprised that the spread was what it was at 3.5 at time of recording. I think that's beyond fair. Like, I think that's not really taking into account how good the Penn State defense is. But I think the pressure in the big picture is more on Oregon, but when toe meets leather in a couple of days, it's going to be a pressure cooker for both teams, no doubt about it.
Yeah, like I don't think James Franklin is going to be having them step out of the tunnel in Indianapolis thinking, hey guys, we're kind of, we're the team that's not supposed to be here. Let's go out there and show we deserve to be here. Like, just what I know about James Franklin, I think the mentality is going to be, no, guys, we belong. Let's go show the world that we do.
Yep.
Let's go show the world that we are better than the team that is number 1 in all the polls, number 2 in SP Plus by ESPN strength of record, the number 1 team in the country. So it's a really interesting game, and there's a lot of really interesting discourse around this, Matt, that before we dive into the game itself, I want to talk about the fact that Penn State essentially has 2 paths here. Number 1 is the path where they win the Big Ten. And as a consequence of winning the Big Ten, they end up getting the number 1 or the number 2 seed in the country. They're adding a trophy to the trophy case for the first time, adding that trophy to the trophy case for the first time since 2016. They are guaranteed a berth in the quarterfinal, but they have to play a team like Georgia, like Ohio State, like Tennessee, like someone like that. And then the other side of this coin is Penn State loses this game, gets the 5 seed or maybe the 6 seed, and gets a far more favorable path where, depending on who the 11 and the 11 seems like it's going to be Alabama. The 12 seems like 12 is kind of destined to be the best G5 team. And then
or the Big 12 champ.
Or the Big 12 champ. And then the 4 would probably be, like Arizona State or something, or SMU or whoever it would be. Basically, in the big picture, I think you can make the argument that if Penn State loses this game, their path to a national championship isn't as difficult. So where do you kind of stand on all of this? Because I feel very strongly about one of these, but I've seen people basically say, like, yeah, I'd rather their path. If they can't beat Oregon, they can't beat Oregon. There's no shame in that. But it would also set them up for probably a better path to a national championship versus, no, they should go out and win the Big Ten and then kind of take on all comers from there.
Not to get deep with this, Bill, but the best path anywhere is the path of least resistance. And for Penn State, that is getting a bye. I totally understand the desire to have Penn State host a home playoff game against what would likely be the 12 or 11 seed, and then go on to face either the Mountain West champion or the Big 12 champion in the semifinal, the quarterfinals, excuse me. I totally get that narrative. But at the same time, this is football. There are 12 teams who are good enough to make it, and all 12 of those teams can bite anybody on any given day. You want as few opportunities to get got, because Penn State, as a top 8 seed in all likelihood, is not one of the teams that is looking to go get someone. They're a team that has to avoid getting got. So the opportunity to play one fewer game with a win against Oregon is of paramount importance to me. Again, I would love for Penn State to host a home playoff game. I would go. I would have a great time. I think the environment would be fantastic. But the best path is the path of least resistance. And I think for Penn State, it's going to be getting that bye week, ensuring that your guys get an extra time off to get healthy, get more time to game plan, and then have your opponents go out there and play a physical game of football against a team that is playing for everything. So that's my take, Bill. I'm pretty sure you're going to agree with me here.
Here's my thing. A lot of how I view sports come through the lens of this quote from, I think, 2019. If you're listening to this podcast or if you know me as a person, I'm a big supporter of Manchester City. Manchester City's manager, Pep Guardiola, has, arguably the greatest manager of all time. He gave a quote in 2019 while they were in the middle of a title race against Liverpool, who I believe that year ended up going on to win the title the only time in the last however many years City haven't won the title. And here is the quote. I'm not going to take the bus there on Sunday thinking I'm going to lose the game. That has never happened in my career. I've always had the feeling that if we do the special things we plan to do, then we will have our chance to win. People keep talking about what will happen if we lose, but what if we win? And all I can think of as I think of this game, Matt, is if Penn State can beat Oregon, if Penn State can knock off the best team in the country, if Penn State can win the best conference in the country, there is not a team in college football that I am going to be scared of. That is not going to be Oregon. It is not going to be Ohio State. It is not going to be Georgia. It is not going to be Texas. It is not going to be Notre Dame or Tennessee or any of these other teams. So I feel very, very strongly about this. The goal is to win championships. The goal is to win as many championships and look your best in as many high-profile games as you possibly can.
And to play your 3s and 4s.
And to play your 3s and 4s, or as they're famously known if they go to the University of Maryland, your starters. The goal is to do that. And right now, Penn State has a chance to accomplish one of the two things it sets out to do every year and win the Big Ten, and win the Big Ten by going up and knocking off the number one team in the country. And frankly, I don't know if they're going to do that. I lead more towards Oregon if I'm trying to put my partial observer hat on here. But like you mentioned the extra week of rest that they would end up getting back. Absolutely. I think Penn State with 2 weeks off would be fine.
Yep.
But that extra week of rest would be great. Losing the home playoff game would stink. Like everyone I know wants to see a home playoff game at Beaver Stadium, but the trade-off of going right to a national quarterfinal, totally worth it.
And the Rose Bowl, I think.
Yeah, the one is the Rose Bowl.
Yeah,
I think, and number 2 might be the show, whatever it is. But I cannot sit here and say anything other than I want Penn State to win as much as they possibly can. And I want Penn State to show me, because I think a lot of the guarding against this, Matt, and you could tell me if I'm crazy, is the belief that if Penn State runs into team XYZ, they run into the best version of Georgia, the best version of Ohio State, the best version of Texas. They just don't have the big guns to compete with them. And I get that. If they can beat Oregon, I think fundamentally they can beat any team in the country and become national champions. Where on the other side of this, if Penn State, I don't think there's any honor in Penn State knocking off Boise State or Arizona State and then Boise State and then getting to a national semifinal and getting, run off the field by Georgia or something like that. But if Penn State can beat a team of Oregon's caliber, if Penn State can be better and show it belongs on the same field as a team of Oregon's caliber, I am going to feel really, really good about Penn State's ability to make it all the way to and potentially win the national championship game.
You're not going to win a natty or make a natty by not beating at least one big dog. So if you're going to have a shot at a big dog, you want as many chances to do that as you can get. This is the biggest opportunity for James Franklin and for the Penn State football program. Frankly, Bill, since he's been here, this is the biggest game of the James Franklin era. To win the Big Ten against the number one team on the country, to potentially, depending on what happens in the SEC title game, get the number one overall seed, it changes the entire narrative around James Franklin and around Penn State. And yeah, Bill, there's certainly, not that there's no honor in beating up on those teams that get in the playoff at lower seeds. But I feel confident Penn State can beat the 12 through 8 team in America I need to see them beat like the 7-1 team in America, and they have an opportunity to do it. And I am just so excited to see what happens on Saturday night. I think it is going to be a fascinating chess match. And again, I think the 3.5 point spread is exactly where this should be. I think we're in for a hell of a game.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a fantastic Big Ten championship game. Let's play a quick game, Matt.
What do you got?
I'm going to pull up the last, let's see, every Big Ten championship game over the last 3 years. You are going to get let me just do one thing.
Purdue was one of them. I know. Purdue won the Big Ten West fairly recently.
Okay. What has been the aggregate score of the 2001 game between Michigan and Iowa?
2021.
The 2002 or 2021, yes. The 2022 game between Michigan and Purdue, and the 2023 game between Michigan and Iowa. What has been the aggregate score in those 3 games?
127 to 9. No, maybe 127 to 23.
Oh,
am I close?
111 to 25.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Michigan beat Iowa 42-3. They beat Purdue 43-22. They beat Iowa again 26-0. I don't think we're going to get a game like that.
Purdue
I
dropped
think
22 in that game. Good for the Boilermakers. That's more than they scored all year.
Well, Jeff Brown will put points up on you. How that ends up going beyond that is a little out there. But yeah, I think you and I are in agreement. If Penn State, the number of questions, the number of critiques, the number of everything that Penn State can answer by winning this football game, that alone makes it so, I'm sure if they lose and they don't get their asses handed to them, I will walk out of Lucas Oil Stadium on Saturday thinking, you know what? This is a really good football team. They got a chance to make some noise, blah, blah, blah. But that does not compare to how I will feel walking out of Lucas Oil Stadium if Penn State picks up this win, wins the Big Ten, and gets to go into the college football playoff knowing that they can beat anyone in the country, including Ohio State. If Penn State can beat Oregon, all the ghosts, all the fears, all the everything about Ohio State over the years are suddenly going to go out the window for me, because I'm going to Penn State could take it to this team. We will, of course, Matt, like I mentioned, I'm going to be there. You are going to be in attendance, correct?
This is correct. I am going to the Big Ten title game. I'm very excited. I've never been to Indianapolis. It's like a 3-hour drive from Chicago, so it's not too bad of a trip at all. I'm very happy that we decided to go. I cannot wait. Bill, I haven't seen you in 5 years, probably, in person?
It's been a minute.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I'm excited. It'll be fun.
It's been a while.
Evil Matt's going to be there too.
He is. I can't remember. Do you have a shellfish allergy?
I used to. I outgrew it, actually, since I've last seen you.
You outgrew it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me tell you something. There is a shrimp cocktail that has your name on it. That I highly.
Where at?
What are your thoughts on horseradish?
Love horseradish.
Oh yeah.
I'm an adult.
It is. Yes. Talk your shit, man. It is called St. Elmo's. It is a famous steakhouse in Indianapolis. You're not going to be able to get a table, maybe you get a seat at the bar. Little something for all of you listening. If you want to get St. Elmo's food, but you can't get into St. Elmo's, they have a sister restaurant called Harry and Izzy's that has the same menu, the same shrimp cocktail, the same lot of stuff. Highly, highly recommend that. And since we're on things from Indianapolis,
wait, St. Elmo's owned by a Penn State alum as well. We should get that out there as well.
It is owned by a Penn State alum. That is right. Not owned by a Penn State alum, but is something that we recommend from the great city of Indianapolis. That would be our podcast sponsor, Home Field Apparel. Home Field has been with us since we decided to go podcast only. And I know for a fact they are very, very excited, the folks over at Home Field Apparel, about Penn State fans coming to Indianapolis, because Penn State fans are really good about buying things from Home Field Apparel. And you really can't blame them when you go through their Penn State collection. You see everything that they have. My sisters were asking me, hey, we want to know what to get you for Christmas. I sent them some stuff from Home Field Apparel because I love stuff from Home Field Apparel. Even if they weren't sponsoring the podcast, I would spend my money at Home Field on shirts, on hoodies, on crew necks, on long sleeve tees, on jackets, on joggers, whatever you have that you want to get into your collection, Home Field Apparel has it, and they have things that don't look like anything else you have in your collection. And of course, this doesn't just apply to Penn State. If you are an alum of another school, and there's a really good chance that Home Field Apparel is going to have something for you. I know I think they have an Oregon selection in the event that we have any Ducks who are listening to this podcast. If you give me 1 second, they do have an Oregon. I couldn't remember if Phil Knight was a little bit tough. Oh boy, their Oregon stuff is good. If not for the fact that Oregon might make me very upset, I would try and get my hands on some of that gear, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to recommend that you instead get your hands on, again, Penn State gear. If you need to get something for the holidays for someone, they are going to have that. And you could use the promo code RLR24 to get 15% off your first order. Again, if you've never ordered anything from Home Field Apparel in the past, use the promo code RLR24 for 15% off of your first order. Thank you again to Home Field Apparel for sponsoring this edition of the podcast. Matt, let's get back to talking about the game. And you said, you mentioned the fact that the spread is 3.5 points. Bill Connolly, SP Plus, has Oregon winning this game 27-24, so a 3-point spread. How are you feeling? How are you feeling about this game, just kind of broadly, Penn State going into this one against the Ducks?
It's an interesting matchup, I think, to say the least. Off the top, I want to talk about the amount of, not respect, because I don't know the guy, but how good of a coach I think Dan Lanning is and is becoming. I think guys who make it to these top rungs of major college football who play D2 ball are wired differently. Franklin's this way. Dan Lanning is this way. These are dudes who love football so much they really took time out of their college experience to play D2 ball simply for the love of the game. Those guys love ball at a level to then work their way up those coaching rankings when you don't have the advantage of starting out at a major program. I automatically have a ton of respect for those kind of guys. I think Dan Lanning is a tough son of a bitch. He is ballsy. He is not afraid to call the game on his terms, and I respect the hell out of him for it. I think Dan Lanning is going to come out there, try to throw the kitchen sink at Penn State, not in terms of getting kind of cutesy with stuff, but in the sense that we have Dylan Gabriel, a 6th-year, 24-year-old quarterback. We have Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson, 2 phenomenal wide receivers. Our running game is pretty good. We're built to win on the defensive line. I think this game is going to be just an absolute dogfight because I do think Penn State can find some yards, and I do think Penn State can create some turnovers. But a Dan Lanning team is going to try to make your life hell for 60 minutes. So right off the bat, I just think the world of Dan Lanning. I think he is going to win a national title at Oregon one day, and it could easily be this year.
Yeah, if he doesn't go to the NFL, there was some talk of him being viewed by NFL people as we're now at the point where everyone is trying to find who's the next. We just had it with Sean McVay. Right now, it's who is the next Dan Campbell, and I saw some comparisons between, or some people say that Lanning is kind of like the next Dan Campbell.
Yeah.
A guy you're going to bring in to try and build up a culture, build up a very specific, do things in a very specific way. The thing that I've really respected about Lanning is that, and this is actually a really good comparison for the NFL fans who listen to Dan Campbell. He is a coach who tries to win games, and win games on his own terms. Sorry,
100%.
I don't want to sound like I don't want to sound like Trent Dilfer saying you can't lose in the NFL and still win games. He tries to win games
head
on
coach,
his own
congratulations
terms.
to Trent Dilfer on retaining his job.
Jesus Christ. And Lanning loves going for it on 4th down. He loves putting his belief that his players can go out there and execute. And they are a group of players who, when you watch them, you can see that they believe in themselves. They believe in their ability to go out and win football games. They believe in in the fact that their coach believes in them. I don't have, let's see, do I have the number of times they go for it on fourth down? I do not.
I have
But
something
I
that
know
kind of leads into that,
Lanning,
Bill.
yeah.
I
Go
have
ahead. Go
so
ahead.
in my initial notes for this team, the first thing I noticed for this Oregon team is that they are very, very good at staying on time. I have it right here. Their third down conversion percentage, Bill, it's like almost 50%. And when you're staying that ahead of the sticks, that you're converting nearly half of your third down conversions, the odds are your fourth down conversions are going to be very advantageous downs and distances. And Dan Lanning is not afraid to shoot his shot when that opportunity comes because he has shown that they can churn out 3-4 yards on a consistent basis.
Yeah, their ability to run the football, Gabriel's ability to throw the ball down the field accurately, it's all really dangerous stuff, and it makes it so you're never going to fully put them away until the game is over. Last year, I know a lot of college football fans ended up watching a lot of Oregon because they played in some really high profile games, particularly against Washington, the only team that was able to beat them. Washington beat them 36-33 and 34-31. And it basically came down to the fact that they just couldn't convert a couple of fourth downs, or else Oregon ends up winning that football game. So they're a team that is going to try and take this. They are a team that is going to, from the very start of this game, there's not going to be a feeling out process in this one. There's not going to be trying to figure out, okay, what works against this other team, what doesn't work against this other team. Oregon is going to go into this game, Matt, from the very beginning going, we are going pedal to the metal. We are going balls to the wall. We are doing everything that we can to take it to Penn State. And that's something that Penn State is going to have to be ready for. If Penn State needs a quarter and a half to really find its footing in this football game, I just don't think they're going to win.
No, and Dan Lanning and the Oregon coaching staff would be smart to start the game with their foot all the way down on the gas. You think about how this Penn State team starts games, especially defensively. It might be a little bit overblown, but there's no denying that this Penn State team or Penn State defense specifically, does not really find its rhythm until midway through the second quarter, and then they're lights out. You cannot afford to spot Oregon 3 or 4 free drives before you say, all right, now we settled in. I mean, Dylan Gabriel, like I said, a 6th-year guy. He's a lefty, which I love a lefty quarterback. He's been really, really good at taking care of the football. 24 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. He's thrown the ball, Bill, almost 375 times. And he's completing about 73.5% of his passes. That's a guy who knows where he wants to go with the football. And that number feels high. And it's not like he's throwing it for like 7 yards per attempt. His YPA is nearly 9. So he is pushing the ball downfield to these weapons. Like I mentioned, Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, Terrence Ferguson. These are guys who are very, very good college football players and will be in the NFL. Jordan James is a hell of a running back. He's averaging 5.7 yards per carry, and he has 13 touchdowns on the year. That's a hell of a stat line to have when you're throwing the ball that prolifically too. It's a balanced team, and Oregon is going to come out and try to throw a haymaker right out of the gate. Penn State needs to be more ready than they've been.
Yeah, Penn State second, Oregon second nationally in SP Plus. They're 0.2 points behind Ohio State for the number 1 team in the nation. SP Plus, the number 2 offense of the country, number 8 defense in the country, number 22 special teams of the country, according to Bill Connolly. And we'll start with Penn State's defense going up against Oregon's offense. I'm going to read some stats off here. Oregon 9th nationally in points per game at 36.2, tied for 5th in yards per play at 6.7. They convert 50% of their third downs, which is tied for 3rd nationally. They run about 5 yards per rush, tied for 27th nationally. As a team, they're converting 72.32% of their passes, which is 2nd nationally. Their quarterback's getting sacked on 2.61% of his dropbacks, which is 6th nationally. 8.8 yards per attempt, that is 12th nationally, and 59 yards per completion. Wow, no, that's not true. 12.1 yards per completion, which is tied for 59th nationally. Matt, they're an offense that is really good at staying on schedule. They're an offense that is really good at picking up yards where they need it. They're an offense that they don't need to get 10 yards in 3 downs. because they are fine with getting 8 yards on 3 downs and then going for it. Going to be a really, really serious test for Penn State's defense, going up against Dillon Gabriel, Jordan James, Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, and the Oregon offensive line in this one.
It's all going to start. Well, first things first, on the injury news for Penn State, we're recording this on Wednesday night after Penn State had its open practice window. Elliott Washington, cornerback, who played a ton of reps late in the season for Penn State, has been out the past couple of weeks, was present and accounted for. We should take that in with how prolific this passing attack is. You want Penn State's pass defense to be at their best. If Penn State has a path to stopping or slowing down Oregon, Bill, there's one guy it starts with, and I think we both know who that is.
Dom DeLuca.
Dom DeLuca, exactly. Interception in multiple games throughout his career. Shout out to Dom as always. No, Bill, I mean, this defensive line, and specifically Abdul Carter. Abdul Carter, he was named the Big Ten Defensive Lineman of the Year this year. Yesterday, I think, is when that award got announced. He's been playing his best football down the stretch. And not to be overlooked, but since coming back from the injury he suffered, I want to say against Wisconsin, Denai Dennis Sutton has reemerged as a legitimate force opposite of him. This Oregon offense will get the ball out quickly. Again, Dillon Gabriel is a grown man playing the college game. And good for him. That's not a shot. Like, stay in as long as you can, make your NIL money. Like, good, honestly, good for Dillon Gabriel. That guy has really come a long way. I think he's a very good quarterback.
And all respect to him, he's not the kind of guy who is going to be going to the NFL.
No.
And undersized dude, doesn't have the biggest arm, all these sorts of things. Like, really, really good football player, but not. He's a guy who is going to whose best football is going to be played in college, and it has been played in college. He's been fantastic,
and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, he has maximized his football experience, and all credit to him. But with all that experience, Bill, comes a very, very thorough understanding of what he can and what he can't do. There are moments where he will try to force a couple of things, and I think with Abdul Carter and Denai Dennis Sutton and Zane Durant, this Penn State front can force him to be a little bit more sped up than he would like. But Abdul Carter needs to come out there and prove that he should be in the running to maybe be a top 2 pick in the NFL draft. I think this game has that kind of potential for number 11. On the back end, the safeties for Penn State, Jalen Reed, Zakee Wheatley. Jalen Reed, I think, needs to go out there and needs to play a very complete game once again, and I believe that he will. And then anything you get out of the linebackers in terms of big splash plays is going to be gravy. So I think it all comes down to Penn State's. It's really simple. Penn State's best players have to play their best game against their best opponent.
Yeah, I'm very interested in how Penn State's secondary holds up in this game. The thing with Dillon Gabriel is that he's going to get the ball out. The Oregon's offensive line does a good job in front of him, and when they've struggled a bit, which is more earlier in the season, they've coalesced a bit ever since the year has gone on. They're really good at getting him, roll. I think this is a point that our guy Landon Tengwall raised. They're really good at moving the pocket and basically putting him into situations that buy him a little extra time and let him push the ball down the field to Evan Stewart, to Trayshawn Holden, to their really talented core of Tez Johnson, Terrence Ferguson. They have a bunch of really good pass catchers on this team. Stewart was in particular, was a high. Johnson's their top receiver, but Stewart was a high profile transfer from Texas A&M. Yeah, former 5-star recruit. And they're going to try to push the ball down the field against this Penn State defense. They're going to try and challenge that part of the Penn State defense. And I'm looking out for Zakee Wheatley and Jalen Reed in particular. I don't know how often Penn State is going to have the luxury of bringing Jalen Reed down in the box as much as they would like, because I think they need to be willing to play them deep and to make sure the defense doesn't get burned. And if that means that Jordan James has a bit of success on the ground, his backup Noah Winnington has been a really promising player too. Gabriel can run. He's not Marcus Mariota, but he's a guy who can run. If they end up finding a little bit of success on the ground, that's something that is going to happen. But Penn State's defensive line is going to have to impose itself in this game and take as much pressure off the secondary as possible. Because I think Penn State's secondary can hold up in this game, but it's going to be really difficult for them to do that. And they're going to get challenged a lot. I mean, against Ohio State, Gabriel, 23 for 34, 341 yards, 2 touchdowns, 10 yards per attempt. Stewart and Johnson both had 7 receptions. Stewart 149 yards and a touchdown. Johnson 75 yards and a touchdown. It's worth mentioning that Ohio State's defensive backs in that game, Davison Igbinosun and Denzel Burke in particular, they were just grabby like you wouldn't believe.
Penalty City.
Flag. Yeah, like really, really difficult game for them, and that hurt Ohio State. Ohio State get 8 penalties for 70 yards in that game. I don't think Penn State's going to do that, but I have been wrong before.
Yep.
But even with that happening, James 23 carries, 115 yards, 5 yards per attempt, and a touchdown. Oregon has a lot of ways to beat you. Oregon has a lot of ways to attack you, Matt, and you're not going to be able to take away everything. At this point in the season, if you want to win a Big Ten or a national championship, this is not supposed to be easy.
No.
It's not going to be easy, but this is one of those tests that we've spoken all year about how good Penn State's defense can be. The other side of this is that against Ohio State, Oregon allowed Will Howard 28 for 35, 326 yards, 2 touchdowns. Against Penn State, Howard had a good game, but it wasn't that by any stretch of the imagination. 16 for 24, 182 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. Trey Henderson, 10 carries, 87 yards. Penn State bottled him up relatively, 10 carries for 54 yards. This is a game where, yes, Penn State's defense hasn't faced anything like Oregon, but it's faced some really, really good offenses so far this season. And to show that they are as good as we all believe them to be, all 3 levels have to play up to the best of their ability. And if all 3 levels play up to the best of their ability, Matt, I think they have a real shot to win this football game.
A couple of things I want to rattle off, and I'm just going to go based on what pops in my head first.
Go ahead.
You think back to these 5 losses Penn State has taken over the last 2 years, and let's throw out the Peach Bowl because it was opt-out city. We'll throw it out.
Sure.
Those 4 games the past 2 years against, or not excluding this one. Well, we can even throw that one in. So the past 5 regular season losses. It's a very convoluted say. The last games against Penn State or Ohio State and Michigan. Penn State did not lose those games because a quarterback and a passing attack went supernova. They lost that game because of offensive ineptitude and because, especially in the case of the Michigan game, they were out physical at the line of scrimmage. I don't think this Penn State team is built to have that happen once again. I think this would have been a very great game to have Alonzo Ford, especially because, Bill, I do agree. I think Jalen Reed and Zeki Wheatley need to sit back and really just, patrol that back half of that defense. And Alonzo Ford, their best run-stuffing defensive tackle, who's out for the year now with an injury, I think he would have been big in this game. But the flip side of that is Zane Durant was snubbed by not at least being a 3rd-team All-Big Ten. I think he should have been 2nd-team All-Big Ten, just my own opinion. Him being just an honorable mention, I think is terrible. Like I think it's just people who don't understand exactly what Zane Durant is doing for this Penn State defense. And I think Zane Durant, with all the attention Abdul Carter and Denai Dennis Sutton are going to get, I think this is going to be a very important game for Zane Durant. He might be the key cog for Penn State in this because, again, with all those receivers who can hurt Penn State, they're going to need the back 7 to really be prepared to be spread out. And then those guys up front need to be ready to play some big boy football. And I think Zane Durant has played a lot of big boy football this year.
And one thing that I am looking out for in this game is that for everything that Oregon's offense is really good at, they are 60th nationally in red zone scoring percentage. They convert score a touchdown or a field goal on 85.11% of their trips into the red zone. That is a little bit worse than Penn State's mark, and we all have been frustrated by Penn State not being able to put up points in the red zone. That game against Ohio State, their first red zone drive ended up with a touchdown. Second one ended up with a field goal. Third one ended up with a turnover on downs. Fourth one ended up with a field goal. This is an offense that, just because they get deep in your own territory, that doesn't necessarily mean they are going to get touchdowns. And if Penn State's defense can hold up in the red zone and limit them to field goals, or if they get incredibly fortunate, limit them to
turnover on downs, like how many
turnovers on
fourths?
downs. Yeah, Penn State is 18th nationally in red zone defense. They're allowing scores on 76% of their opponent trips into the red zone. So a little something worth flagging there. Just because they move the ball on Penn State in between the 20s doesn't mean they are going to keep moving the ball into the end zone. Penn State will, again, this is one of those games where Oregon is going to throw everything at them. If Penn State cannot get knocked, if Penn State can avoid the knockout blow, this isn't going to, I don't think this is like 2016 where Penn State fell down 28-7 against Wisconsin and was able to, big play its way back to the game. I don't think Penn State can win a game like that. But if Penn State can keep Oregon within touching distance, and Penn State can get Oregon to just settle for field goals a couple of times when they should be getting 6, maybe hold up on a 4th down, all these sorts of things, I think Penn State's defense can give them a shot at this game. But then when you move over to the other side of the football, Matt, Penn State's offense, I've said it in the past that I like to look at this game, one team's offense versus one team's defense, and then vice versa, and kind of let that inform how I view it. If you do that, the 2 worst units in this game are Oregon's defense, which is 8th in defensive SP+, and Penn State's offense, which I believe is 12th in offensive SP+. I'm a little bit worried about Penn State's offense in this one, just because I am worried about how their offensive line is going to hold up against Oregon's very, very good defensive line.
Dude, Jordan Birch and Mateo Uyunglele, I hope I said his last name right. There's been a Uyunglele in college football for like a decade, it feels like. Those dudes are dogs, Sunday players, both those guys.
Yeah. And their standout defensive tackle, Derek Harmon, a Michigan State transfer, has been one of the best players in all of college football this year. A guy who transferred from Michigan State and is just
he loves
really taken off. So yes, he's it's his color, as everyone says. You look across the front of Oregon's defensive line. Uyunglele, 6'5", 270 pounds. Birch, 6'6", 295 pounds. Harmon, 6'5", 310 pounds. Caldwell, 6'1", 340 pounds. Penn State's offensive line, which is already down one guy in Anthony, probably its most powerful offensive, maybe its most powerful offensive lineman.
Their best run blocker, and it's not close. Donko was
their best run blocker. Mm-hmm. This is going to be kind of like similar to the Ohio State game. You can make the case that these Oregon and Ohio State are the 2 best defensive lines in the country. If they can't hold up in this game, Penn State's offense is in a lot of trouble.
So a couple of things on just that offensive line front. Nick Dawkins and Nolan Rucci need to play the best game of their careers. Like, not even of the season. The best football they have ever played has to happen on Saturday night at Lucas Oil Stadium. I'm really happy that Nick Dawkins has been able to hold down that center job all year. And I'm very happy that Nolan Rucci played pretty well when he's had to be called upon and played well against Maryland last week. This is a completely different beast. Dawkins and Rucci need to get push for Penn State to be successful. I trust that Aller is going to get the ball out quickly. I trust Kotelnicki will have a good scheme. I trust that Aller is strong enough and sneaky fast enough to get some extra yards when they come available. But it is going to be on Nick Dawkins and Nolan Rucci to hold down their responsibility 4 seconds at a time. And if they can do that, Penn State has a shot. That's a big if. I totally understand that's a very big if, but it's those 2 guys. Second of all, you mentioned the Ohio State game, how this Oregon defensive line is maybe the best, second best in the country right there with Ohio State. Nick Singleton was not the same Nick Singleton we have right now back when Penn State played Ohio State. Nick Singleton is healthy. He is running aggressive. He is unlocked a level of speed we have not seen from him in a couple of months. And I think if Nick Singleton, if he finds an inch, he can go a mile. And I think his speed is going to, I think he's going to rip off his biggest run of the year in this game. That's my prediction. I think Kotelnicki's going to have something schemed up to where Singleton's going to rip a big one. And Penn State needs him if they want to have a shot to win this game.
Singleton's long so far this season is 41 yards, which I believe came against came against Bowling Green. He had a 40-yarder against West Virginia, but since then hasn't had a carry of more than 20 yards. Like you mentioned, he had been carrying something, and I said this week he's got to the point where he's as healthy as he has been. We'll read some stats in a second. The first one I'm going to read is from our buddy Johnny McGonigal of Penn Live. 73 quarterbacks have faced pressure on at least 100 dropbacks this season. Drew Aller, only one with 0 turnover-worthy plays under pressure. You actually go back and watch that game between Oregon and Ohio State, and it was a 1-point game. It was a really tight game throughout. Both offenses were able to move the ball on one another. Oregon also won by 1 point in a game where it was able to generate a pair of turnovers. There were 2 Ohio State fumbles that they were able to recover. One by Kinshawn Judkins that I believe happened very early in the game. Yeah, early in the game that led to a fumble. And then they were able to, kick a opening or a kickoff after a touchdown, hit off of an Ohio State player. Oregon falls on it. They get a field goal out of that. There's 10 points in a game that they won by 1. So that is something really important. Drew Aller's ability to hold on to the football is absolutely crucial in this game. Going through some more big picture stats about Oregon's defense and where you can get them. You really can't get them anywhere. Allowing 16.4 points per game, which is 9th nationally, 4.5 yards per play, which is 10th nationally. Allowing opponents to convert on 31.97% of their third downs, which is 13th nationally, allowing 3.7 yards per rush, which is tied for 25th nationally. Opponents are completing 6.71% of their pass attempts, which is 15th nationally. They're sacking opposing quarterbacks on 9.14% of dropbacks, which is 11th nationally. 5.8 yards per attempt is tied for 5th nationally. 10.2 yards per completion is tied for 9th nationally. They do basically everything well. You can run the ball on them a little bit.
That's why I said if Singleton's going to have his impact on this game, it's going to have to be through an explosive play. Those are there against any defense. Like, you're not going to churn it out for 5 yards a carry against this front. If you're going to, in the box score, if it's going to show you have 5 yards per carry, it's going to be because you ripped off a big one somewhere along the way.
Yeah, but they're also not. It's not like their back seven is super susceptible. Their linebackers haven't been great or anything like that. Lanning comes from the Kirby Smart tree. He knows how to put together a team that's really athletic and really fast and really physical and really aggressive. Their defensive backfield, a ton of transfers. Brandon Johnson transfer from Duke. Nico Reed been there for 2 years, but a transfer from Colorado. Jabbar Muhammad, kind of the standout in their defensive backfield. Started at Oklahoma State, ended up going to Washington for a year where he was absolutely unbelievable, but ended up spending his final year at Oregon. He's a guy who could very well end up in the NFL. But something that I find really interesting about Oregon's front or back seven, Matt, Brandon Johnson is 5'10". Jabbar Muhammad is 5'10". And I'm going off of our lads in their depth chart. Kobe Savage is 5'11". Tysheen Johnson is 5'10". Nico Reed, 5'10". Jeffrey Bassa, a linebacker, 6'2". Other linebackers can move, certainly, but Bryce Bottisher, 6'2". And then Tatum Tuioti is 6'3". They're bigger they're not very big dudes. They're fast, they're physical, they're aggressive. I don't know what Oregon's plan in this game is for dealing with Tyler Warren specifically, who is bigger and more physical than just about everybody that they have. Maybe they, I trust that Dan Lanning can come up with a plan. I don't see who the guy is or the guys are on Oregon's defense who are going to be able to say, I am running with 44 for the entire game and making him work for everything that he does, because, in the way that like Caleb Downs was able to do that when Penn State played Ohio State.
So a couple of things. And again, we talked about this. We're recording after practice. Trey Wallace did practice. He was out of the Maryland game. So Penn State's best receiver, or best wide receiver, not best pass catcher, is expected to play in this game, which is a humongous boost for Penn State. Bill, part of me wonders if like USC may have had the best game plan for Tyler Warren of anybody they've played. And that may sound insane on the surface, considering the stat line he put up. But like,
just let him get his over and over.
Tyler Warren get his, and like USC took Penn State to overtime and probably should have won that game. Like the USC offense being inept is what cost them that game. It wasn't the USC defense letting Tyler Warren run wild. I don't think Dan Lanning's going to let, Warren go for 16 catches and 200 something yards. I do not believe that. But, at some point you do have to wonder if it's not exactly the worst idea to let Tyler Warren get 7-8 yards and avoid taking, the top, avoid letting Penn State take deep shots and get the explosive plays in the passing game that they've been chasing all year, and hope that they stall out when it gets into those short, third and short situations, second and short, because you have a defensive line on Oregon who can bully some people. I don't think that's the worst strategy. Like Tyler Warren, I think, is going to have a big game. I think we're going to hear his name called a lot. And that just feels like a good idea. Like let 44 get his. And then if I'm Oregon, I am making sure that nobody else on that team is able to beat me. Trey Wallace, I think, needs to have a very big game for Penn, just in terms of, again, I think Warren's going to get his. I think Singleton's going to find his big play. You need one more guy for Dan Lanning and that Oregon staff to constantly be worried about. That guy has not existed all year. And if it's going to be anybody, I'm placing my trips on Trey Wallace. I think Amari Evans is not going to be able to be a guy who's running, a slot fade down the seam every single time. But I think that Trey can be the guy to get you 9 yards in a pinch.
Yeah. And I'm really interested in Singleton in the passing game in this one, because we haven't really seen Penn State throw the ball to Singleton when he has that, they haven't really designed ways to throw the ball to Nick Singleton, right? It's a lot of Drew dumping it off to him and him kind of doing his thing. If you get Nick Singleton going the bit of a head of speed into a bit of a space, and you give him, and he's able to bring the football in and just take off, I'm very interested in what that ends up looking like. And I'm interested in Andy Kotelnicki, if Oregon pays a lot of respect to the threat of Tyler Warren and Jabbar Muhammad's busy dealing with Harrison Wallace all game, if that's something they try to take advantage of. But every element of Oregon's defense is really good.
Dan Lanning, the guy who built that Georgia defense up, turns out he's really good at building defenses.
Yeah. They've done incredible work recruiting and the transfer portal and developing it. Like, they have checked every single box and are deserved number one team in the country. And every Penn State player has to play their best game. I don't think Penn State can survive with a bad game from just about everyone. Are there any players on either side of the ball, Matt, who you think are especially important for Penn State in this one?
I mentioned Zane Durant as like maybe that key cog defensively. Offensively, I mean, I kind of want to say it's Vega Ioane. Like, not to have this. I mean, this game's going to be won in the trenches. Like, that's how big boy football is won. I highlighted Nick Dawkins. I highlighted Nolan Rucci. Vega Ioane is Penn State's best offensive lineman. And I'm not saying he's going to have to help out Nick Dawkins a ton, but with how often they move Vega around, with everything he's responsible for, just in like the average drive where he's lined up a million different places, he gets a running start, he's a decent pass blocker. If Penn State's going to find a lane in the running game, I feel like it's going to be behind Vega Ioane, whether that be with Katron Allen or Nick Singleton. I think big number 71 from Washington, playing a West Coast team once again, I think Vega's a guy who might be an unsung hero in this game.
I'm going to. It's weird to say this about him. Well, two guys on offense, I'll say. Uh, Number one, I think having, I don't think Katron Allen has looked great the last couple of weeks, but I think in a game where Penn State might just occasionally need someone who's going to put his head down and churn out 3 yards and just act as a bit of a battering ram, I think having the threat of that alongside what Singleton does is something that's going to be really important. And then we've seen how Penn State has taken advantage of the fact, has used Khalil Dinkins over the years to take advantage of the fact there's going to be a ton of attention on this guy, this guy, this guy. I'm interested in if they have one of those sleights of hand ready with Dinkins when Warren is out there, when Wallace is out there, when Singleton is out there, when another receiver is out there. And there's so much attention to all those other guys that they're able to get the ball to Dinkins in just one of those really clever and really reliable ways that we have seen over the years. And then on the defensive side of the football, the guy I'm looking at is Zaki Wheatley, because I think Penn State just needs one of their guys who has that nose for the football to generate one or two, if not turnovers, one or two things that like spooks Oregon's offense, that makes them go, we can't do that again. We have to change up our plan here and here. We have to make it so, oh God, I see him over there. I'm going to hold on to it for that extra beat that lets Abdul Carter get home. And I think for how good Jalen Reed is, Zaki Wheatley's thing has been for 3 years now, that he's the guy who is able to have that nose for the ball. He has one interception this year. He's forced a fumble. He has a fumble recovery. I want to see if he can get just that one extra possession, those 2 extra possessions that, as we saw during the Oregon game against Ohio State, could be really, really valuable when you are in this kind of a heavyweight fight.
That's a great one.
I think this is going to be an unbelievable football game. I think this is a game that is going to be befitting of the Big Ten championship game. The last couple of years, we just haven't had that because of how unbalanced the divisions have been. But that's gone. These are, you could say, the 2 best teams in the Big Ten. You could say 2 of the 3 or 2 of the 4 best teams in the Big Ten. I'd be fine with however you want to do that. But Penn State, Oregon, 2 of the very best that the Big Ten has to offer. Both of these teams are battle tested. Both of these teams have picked up big wins throughout the season. Both of these teams have real aspirations of getting the number 1 seed in the country as the first expanded college football playoff rolls around. Matt, what are you thinking? Line, like I said, is 3.5. Bill Connolly has it at 27-24 Oregon. What do you think is going to happen in this one, and who do you have coming out on top?
It's been a while. And if you have children around, I'm going to curse. And I apologize. It's been a while since we've seen this version of James Franklin reemerge. The guy that's been around. The guy that
I know exactly what your profanity is going to be.
The guy who fakes the punt against Minnesota, the guy who chucks it deep with a second to go against Maryland, the guy who says, "Fuck you, I'm calling the game the way I want to call the game."
I didn't think that was going to be what the profanity was going to be.
Oh, well, I'm sorry.
I thought, did you see the video PSU Dylan on PSU_Dylan tweeted it out
of him yelling at a fan?
Yeah, like the fan was like, "Yeah, we'll see you in Indy. We'll see you in Indy." And Franklin just goes, "Lock the fuck in."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Yep, okay.
Yeah.
Yep, he's he really is serious about that 1-0 stuff."
Listen, James Franklin gets a lot of shit for his record against top 5 opponents. I get it. Everybody sucks against top 5 opponents. Is Franklin's a little bit worse than most? Yes. James Franklin is at Penn State because he won 9 games at Vanderbilt. He's the guy who says, "Fuck you," or he was the guy who says, "Fuck you," and he's going to find a way to win a game he shouldn't win. That's how Penn State won the Big Ten in 2016, to be frank. That guy hasn't been around in a long time. That guy comes out when Penn State is playing with house money, I think, a lot of the time. I think Oregon's the number 1 team for a reason. So these people who are saying, "I can't believe this line is what it is," I think just have an idea of what Penn State and James Franklin is that has been formed by listening to other people and not actually watching the game. This is a good football team. This has been the best James Franklin season of his tenure. 11 regular season wins. I think Penn State keeps it close. I think Aller plays a very good game and continues to build to his NFL draft resume. But I have Oregon 28, Penn State 27 in a classic.
Yeah, that sounds like it'd be 100% reasonable. Something I find really interesting about this game, Penn State coming into this game with the 36th nationally in Football Power Index's strength of schedule. Oregon coming in 60th nationally. They have a ton of common opponents this year: UCLA, Ohio State, Purdue, Illinois, Maryland, Wisconsin, and Washington. And someone actually went through the aggregate of all of those games, and I think in the aggregate, Penn State was 2 points better than Oregon. I think, if Penn State outscored all those teams by 150 points, Oregon outscored them by 148. It was something
Very
like
close.
that. Something
Yeah.
that
These are two evenly matched
some
teams. Yeah.
Yeah. These are two very good football teams. Two teams that I think are capable of throwing their best punch, taking the other team's best punch, and responding with it. I'm ultimately going to pick Oregon just because I'm worried about Penn State in the trenches on offense against their defensive line.
Mm-hmm.
I think that has the potential to take over. No, I don't want to say take over this game, but do enough to keep Nick Singleton from getting into a real rhythm that kills them. Do enough to speed Drew Aller up a bit, and maybe he's just not as accurate as we know Drew can be at his very best, and he's not feeling himself in the way that he can be at his very best. Ultimately, I think that's the game. I think this entire game comes down to how does Penn State, because Oregon's going to move the ball, Oregon's going to score points, Penn State's going to get stops every now and then, make Dylan Gabriel's life hard. That side of the ball, I'm not worried about. I know Oregon is going to get theirs. I don't think Penn State is going to just roll over, though. On the other side of the football, though, when I look at how good Oregon's defensive line is, with how big and nasty and physical and aggressive that group is, I think that provides such a challenge for Penn State's offensive line that it just ends up being a little bit too much for them. I think Oregon's something like 31-23. Just because of how they are able to get Penn State's offense off schedule. But having said that, this is not a game where I think Penn State is going in without a shot. I think if Penn State's offensive line can hold up, and remember, if you remember in the 2016 game, Penn State had a real patchwork offensive line going up against a Wisconsin defensive front that was led by TJ Watt, was incredibly good, and yet they were able
But
to
couldn't cover the
patchwork
wheel
their
route.
way. Couldn't cover the well, obviously that was part of it, but they were not able to. Even though TJ Watt and Vince Beagle and TJ Edwards, Jack Cishia, some NFL players in that front were able to get theirs, Penn State was able to figure out how to mitigate that over the course of the game. If Penn State could do that here, and Penn State can remain in touching distance by the time they figure out, or take a lead for all I know, by the time they figure out how to deal with Oregon's defensive front, I do think they win this game. I just don't know if they're going to be able to do that early enough. So 31-23, Matt. In a way,
a lot of points,
though, it's going to be, I think, a high-scoring game. What is the spread in this one? I should have
3.5.
kept that pulled. Or total, my bad.
Total.
Wrong word. 49.5. So 31-23 would be a little bit over. What did you had a 28-27? So
Correct.
You would have it a little bit over as well.
Mm-hmm.
ESPN's FPI actually gives Penn State a 54% chance of winning this game for reasons that I don't understand, because by FPI, Oregon is a higher rated team than Penn State. But listen, I certainly, Matt, would not be upset if Penn State won this football game, not by a little.
Bill, do you know, in the only 2 games Drew Allar's played in indoor stadiums, how many passing yards he has?
That would have been Michigan State and Ole Miss last year.
Correct.
Michigan State, I know he threw for, or did he throw for 295 yards against Michigan State last year?
What an insane thing to know off the top of your head. Yes, that's the number on the money.
And then Ole Miss, I think he eclipsed 300 yards. Was that like 320?
292.
292.
He's broke
Okay.
290. He's thrown for almost 600 yards his last 2 indoor games. Again, very different beast. Does that matter? No, but perfect conditions. So something I'm monitoring to see if that changes anything here.
Yeah, and perfect conditions also means that Ryan Barker is not going to miss a single kick, because Ryan Barker just doesn't do that. That's another thing worth mentioning.
I'm knocking on wood. I'm knocking on wood.
Oregon 22nd in special teams SP plus, their kicker Atticus Sappington has missed a couple
kicker name,
PATs
dude.
this year.
Awesome kicker name.
Yeah,
Atticus Sappington. Are you kidding me, dude? Awesome kicker name.
13 for 15 on the year as a kicker. I don't remember. I don't have their punters stats here off the top of my head, so apologies to the fans of punters in this game, and I don't have the return stats either. So let's just wrap up this episode of the podcast. Matt, any final things you want to say?
No, if you're traveling to the game, travel safe. It'll be a great time. If you're going to Indy and if you see Bill or myself out and about, say hello. Bill, I'm excited to watch this game. I'm excited to see you. I'm excited to see Matt and the whole little crew that is slowly forming. I have never been to the Big Ten championship game, and I am very excited to enjoy it with my buddies. So it should be a really, really fun time. So travel safe if you're going to the game.
Yeah, for sure. And like Matt said, if you go there and you run into myself or Matt, by all means, come on up, say hello. Let's talk Penn State football. Let's talk Penn State basketball. Let's talk bars in Happy Valley. Whatever you want to do, hit us up. We'll be there. We're excited to see all of you in there. We're just excited to see Penn State compete in the Big Ten championship game, a thing that wasn't going to happen as of a week ago. And I think that's part of it with me, Matt. It's just the whiplash of all of this is catching me off guard. But I'm stoked. I can't wait.
I was supposed to see Gladiator 2 this weekend, dude. I was going to go see Gladiator 2. I already saw Wicked. I was excited to get the next movie in. So I have to go to Indy instead.
Poor you.
I know.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. Again, and as always, make sure you subscribe wherever you go and get your podcast. If you use Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review. Spotify, leave us 5 stars over there. If you are a fan of watching these on YouTube, hop on over to our YouTube channel, subscribe to us over there, and then go into the comments, talk about football with whomever pops up in the comments over there. Make sure you're following us on Twitter. Make sure you're following us on Blue Sky. And of course, make sure you use the promo code RLR24 to get 15% off your first order from Home Field Apparel. One last time, thank you everyone for listening to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. For Matt Filipovitz, I'm Bill DeFilippo. Take care, everyone.
Penn State basketball favored against Purdue tonight when this is coming out. Sweat with us.